My name is Alara Vance and I died on a Tuesday. The memory is a cold, sharp shard lodged in my heart. The metallic scent of blood, the terrifying weakness seeping into my limbs, and the distant, panicked voices of the nurses. But most of all, I remember the silence from the man whose child I was carrying. The phone call I'd made in a moment of delirium, where I'd heard my sister's faint, fevered whimper in the background and his calm, dismissive reply. Liliana isn't well. It's just a fever. I'll be there when I can. He never came. I died with our son, my life bleeding out onto sterile white sheets, a final tragic transaction for a man who valued me less than my sister's slightest discomfort. When I opened my eyes, I expected an afterlife of nothingness. Instead, I was greeted by the dizzying swirl of crystal chandeliers and the cacophony of 100 murmured conversations. The scent of champagne and expensive perfume replaced the antiseptic smell of a hospital. My lungs drew in a sharp, painful breath. I was back. Back at my engagement banquet. My hand was warm, clasped firmly in another's. I looked down, then slowly, disbelievingly, traced the path of our joined hands up to the face of the man standing beside me. Alistair Reed. My fiancé. His profile was as perfect and cold as a marble statue, his attention focused elsewhere. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage. I followed his gaze and there she was. Liliana. My little sister. The family's darling. My darling. She stood before us, a vision of calculated vulnerability. She was wearing my couture engagement gown, the one I had spent months designing with a renowned Parisian designer. The ivory silk, embroidered with tiny seed pearls, was a fraction too tight on her, pulling across the bust and hips in a way that was subtly, undeniably inappropriate. Her face, under a layer of flawless makeup, was a masterpiece of pitiful appeal. Her eyes, large and shimmering with unshed tears, were fixed on Alistair. The scene was a perfect, painful replica of my memory. This was the moment she had asked for him. And in my first life I had clutched his hand, my knuckles white, and uttered the words that would seal my doom. This time, big sister can't give him to you. I had been so proud of that feeble stand. I had mistaken Alistair's subsequent, murmured sorry, to Liliana as a sign of his loyalty to me. I was a fool. That apology wasn't for me. It was a shared moment of regret between him and my sister. A silent promise that I was the inconvenient obstacle. A lifetime of conditioning screamed at me to give in. A lifetime of handing her my favorite dolls, my desserts, my opportunities, my dignity. As long as she said the word, I would give her any toy she wanted. And Alistair Reed, with his fortune and his fine bones, was the ultimate toy. But the memory of blood and betrayal was a colder, stronger voice. I felt Alistair's hand tense in mine. He was about to speak, to deliver his placating, two-faced apology. The guests were watching, their eyes like lasers burning into my skin, waiting for the drama to unfold. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of my own resurrection. I looked at Liliana's performative sorrow, at Alistair's thinly veiled regret, and I made my choice. I loosened my grip on Alistair's hand. The movement was small, but he felt it immediately, his head turning toward me in surprise. Just kidding, I said, my voice light and airy, a stark contrast to the tension in the room. I released his hand completely, as if dropping a piece of trash. If Liliana wants something, how could her big sister not give it to her? The silence that fell was absolute, more profound than any noise. Liliana's perfectly practiced expression shattered into pure, unadulterated shock. Her jaw went slack, the tears in her eyes drying up from sheer disbelief. This was the first time in her 20-some years that she had been truly, publicly denied, only to be given what she wanted in the most dismissive way possible. Alistair froze, his cool composure cracking. Alara, he said, his voice low, a warning and a question. This isn't fair to you. I waved a dismissive hand, a perfect mirror of the gesture he often used on me. Whoever the Reed heir marries, it's still a Vance-Reed alliance. Isn't my sister also part of the Vance family? I saw the flicker in his eyes. Not concern for me, but a rapid calculation of what this meant for his declining family empire. He needed my business acumen, not just my name. Liliana was a beautiful ornament. I was the foundation. But Liliana, ever the opportunist, saw her opening. The shock melted away, replaced by a gleam of triumph she couldn't quite suppress. She pressed her lips together, trying to look concerned. But Alara, if you give him up like this, then the Reed Company. It's all yours, I interrupted, my smile sweet and sharp as a razor. As long as my sister wants it. That was all the confirmation she needed. A real, unforced smile curved her lips, bright and victorious. Oh, my dear spoiled sister. You have no idea what you've just asked for. In my past life, I worked myself to the brink of a nervous breakdown, sacrificing my health and sanity to pull the Reed Group from the brink of collapse. The fortune she thought she was stealing was a debt-ridden empire on the verge of implosion. Let her have it. Let her drown in it. Alistair, ever the pragmatist, set the diamond ring he'd been holding aside. This ring was made to your sister's size, he told Liliana, his voice returning to its usual detached calm. I'll order another one for you later. Liliana blushed, the picture of demure victory. If there's nothing else, I'll leave now. The engagement banquet was effectively over. My engagement was over. A strange, wild sense of freedom began to bubble up inside me, threatening to turn into hysterical laughter. I had just thrown away the man who would cause my death. Now I needed to secure my future. My eyes scanned the crowd of stunned, whispering guests. And then I saw him. A tall, solitary figure was rising from a shadowed corner, moving with a lazy, almost predatory grace toward the exit. Cashin Reed. Alistair's illegitimate half-brother. The family's dirty secret. In my first life, after I refused to give up Alistair, Liliana had been hastily married off to Cashin. She found the union disgraceful and divorced him within a year. Freed from the constraints of the Reed family, Cashin had severed all ties and vanished. He reappeared years later as my most formidable business rival, a self-made titan whose empire crushed mine again and again. He was a man who stood alone, an army of thousands. A man like that, if I couldn't have him as an ally, would only become my executioner once more. A plan desperate and brilliant, ignited in my mind. I snatched the discarded engagement ring from the table. Its diamond was cold and heavy in my palm. I didn't hesitate. I gathered the skirts of my dress, not the one Liliana had stolen, but another I'd changed into, and hurried after him. Cashin! I called out, my voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. He paused at the grand doorway, turning slowly. His eyes were the color of a stormy sea, and they held none of Alistair's polished civility. They were raw, intelligent, and deeply cynical. I stopped before him, my chest heaving slightly. I thrust the ring toward him. Marry me. He glanced at the ring, then back at my face, one dark eyebrow arching in amusement. You want to marry me? His voice was a low rumble, devoid of the refined tones of his brother. I nodded, my resolve hardening. Yes. He was half a head taller than me. He leaned down, his gaze sweeping over my flushed face, my determined eyes. A faint, mocking smile touched his lips. Miss Vance, let me remind you I'm a bastard. I have no share of the Reed fortune. Marrying me won't end well for you. His bluntness was a shock, a refreshing gust of truth in a world of lies. He wasn't trying to lure me, he was warning me off. I met his gaze squarely, my hand still outstretched, the ring glinting between us. How do you know it won't end well? I challenged, a reckless smile touching my own lips. They say the second young master is bold. Dare you take a gamble? His thick brows furrowed slightly, the mockery in his eyes shifting to something more akin to interest. I pressed my advantage, the words falling from my lips before I could stop them. I dare to gamble on you. Don't you dare to gamble that I'll love you. A complex series of emotions flickered in the depths of his stormy eyes. Surprise, suspicion, and a deep, old wound. Finally, it settled into a cold laugh that seemed to vibrate through his chest. He took my hand, his grip firm and calloused, so different from Alistair's smooth, manicured touch. He plucked the ring from my palm and slid it onto my finger. You're insane, he murmured, but there was no disgust in his tone. Only a strange, resigned acceptance. With that, he turned and walked away as if our engagement was nothing more consequential than a casual drink with friends. I looked down at the diamond glittering on my finger, a symbol of my rebellion and my desperate, dangerous hope. A slow, victorious smile spread across my face. When I returned to the main hall, Liliana was already clinging to Alistair's arm, raising a glass to the confused guests. My engagement banquet had become her victory party. She saw me and her eyes dropped to the ring on my finger. Her lips curled with scorn. "The second Reed brother suits my sister better," she announced, her voice dripping with false sympathy. The guests fell into an awkward silence. Everyone knew the illegitimate son of the Reeds was unpresentable. To say it so openly was a brutal humiliation. I laughed aloud, the sound clear and unburdened. "Liliana, if I were you, I'd kneel right now and knock my head 3 times in thanks." She blinked, her smile faltering. "What?" I raised my voice, ensuring every ear in the room could hear me. "If I hadn't handed him over, could you have gotten your brother-in-law so easily? You gain the man and still act so coy. Be careful, little sister. Soaking in all this favor, you might as well be brewing a whole pot of green tea." A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. My spoiled little sister flushed a brilliant, furious red. "You're talking nonsense," she sputtered. "Alistair and I are truly in love. We don't need you to give him up." "Truly in love?" I sneered, stepping forward and grabbing a handful of the gown she wore. "My gown? How's my dress? Does it fit you well?" The guests began to whisper loudly. No wonder it didn't seem to fit her perfectly. So, it really was her sister's dress. The Vances are a wealthy family. Did she really have to wear someone else's gown? Her intentions were clearly deliberate. I chuckled, releasing the silk as if it were contaminated. "If you're so in love, why did you have to steal my dress just to make yourself feel presentable? Are you that insecure? Afraid your brother-in-law wouldn't look at you otherwise?" I paused for effect, my gaze flicking to Alistair's stony face. "Oh, sorry. Not my brother-in-law anymore." Alistair's brow furrowed. "Enough already, Alara. Just a few words and you're angry, Alistair?" I picked up a forgotten glass of champagne from a passing tray and raised it high. I look at him calmly and raise my glass. "Wishing you a long and happy life together." My tone was so casual, so utterly devoid of the heartbreak he clearly expected, that it threw him off balance. His frown deepened. People are just like that. Winning what they desire brings joy. But if the one who gave it up shows no trace of regret, the heart can't help but feel uneasy. I was here precisely to make them uneasy. I drained the glass, the champagne bubbling on my tongue like a promise. The first move was made. The board was set. This time I was playing to win. The days that followed my explosive re-engagement were a whirlwind of silent condemnation and open gossip. The Vance estate, which had always been my gilded cage, now felt like a hostile territory. My mother, Serafina, couldn't meet my eyes. Her love, always conditional, had now fully retracted, bestowed entirely upon her biological daughter, the triumphant Liliana. My stepfather, Arthur Vance, viewed me with a new, cold disappointment. I had embarrassed the family not by being jilted, but by choosing a path he deemed beneath our status. Liliana and Alistair's wedding was a spectacle of opulence, far grander than my first wedding had been in my previous life. It was a public declaration of her victory and his family's renewed, if fragile, standing. I watched it from a distance, a ghost at my own funeral, feeling nothing but a cold, detached satisfaction. Cashin and I had no wedding. On the day we got our marriage certificate, we found a small, quiet restaurant and ate a meal in near silence. That was it. That was our marriage. See. Cashin grinned, his expression carelessly mocking as he swirled the wine in his glass. "Being with me brings you nothing good." I took a sip of my own wine, the rich flavor a small comfort. "Don't worry," I said, my voice steady. "You still have me. Under my name, the Vance family assigned me a share of assets. It was small but profitable. Not insignificant for the two of us, both now castaways from our respective families. Cashin hadn't expected me to take it so calmly." He froze for a moment, the careless mask slipping just enough for me to see a flicker of genuine surprise, before his features settled back into their usual indifference. "Then I guess we'll starve slowly," he quipped, but the edge was gone from his voice. No wonder Liliana had divorced him in my past life. With this kind of temperament she never could have handled him. But I didn't feel angry. He and I weren't so different. In the Vance household, what was I but the same as an illegitimate child? The daughter from my mother's first marriage, a permanent reminder of a past she wanted to forget. I had no right to oppose, no qualification to be truly recognized. The true heir, Liliana, could take whatever she wanted and all I could do was yield. The family gave me a name, gave me some benefits, and in return I was expected to be dutiful and proper, repaying them with everything I had. As for the foolish longing I had for genuine affection, I should have known better than to show it. Liliana was always waiting for me to earn more for her, and no one in the house ever cared to listen to my complaints. Little by little, I had buried those selfish desires until it was as if they had never existed. Moonlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our modest apartment, casting long dramatic shadows across Cashin's sharp features. He was leaning against the window frame looking out at the city lights, a solitary figure even in his own home. Suddenly I wondered if my approach had been wrong. I wanted to use him to take advantage of his future rise to carve a path for myself. But the way I had tried to lure him with the promise of love, the very thing I had always craved and never received, felt a little cruel. The wine in my glass trembled slightly. Still, I felt no anger at his lack of cooperation. "Don't worry," I whispered into the quiet room, the words meant as much for myself as for him. "As long as I'm breathing, I'll do what I can to clear the way for you." He turned his head, his stormy eyes narrowing in the dim light. I continued, my voice low. "When you've lacked something for too long and then you see it missing in someone else, some people will only make them suffer more. Others will give all they can to make up for it." I met his gaze squarely. I was the latter. He froze completely this time. Maybe it was just my imagination, but his eyes didn't look so detached anymore. Instead, he lifted his glass in a slow, deliberate mock salute. "Miss Vance," he said, the title sounding like a challenge on his lips. "Once you give me something, there's no taking it back. Think carefully before you say it." I let out a soft, helpless sigh and walked over to him, clinking my glass against his. The sound was a clear, sharp note in the silent room. "What do you take me for?" He didn't answer, only continued to watch me, his expression unreadable. Liliana's honeymoon period of playing house didn't last long. The news began to trickle in, then pour. The Reed Group, which I had once painstakingly stabilized, was a complex beast, and Liliana had no idea how to tame it. Accounts that had always been steady under my watch began to show staggering losses. Meanwhile, the small portfolio of assets I still controlled under the Vance name was thriving, making record profits that far outstripped her deficits. After all, in my past life I had kept the Vance family secure at the top while dragging the nearly dead Reeds to the summit of the business world. Managing a few assets this time around was child's play. I knew every market fluctuation, every risky investment, every golden opportunity before it even appeared. It was like playing a game of chess where I already knew every move my opponent would make. But at a family dinner not long after, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations. The opulent dining room felt smaller, the air harder to breathe. "Ilara," my mother began, her voice saccharine and sharp. "Your recent performance in business has been excellent. We're all so impressed. But your sister has run into a bit of trouble. Don't you think you should take your profits and help her?" I had just lifted a spoon of soup to my lips. I paused, slowly lowering it back into the bowl, the porcelain clinking softly against the silver. I raised my head and met her gaze. She continued, a rehearsed speech delivered with maternal concern. "I've calculated it. If you move over your recent profits along with your current liquid funds, it will be just enough to cover the gap for several months. As the elder sister, you ought to contribute to the family." I nearly laughed aloud. The audacity was breathtaking. "Dad, Mom," I said, my voice cool and even. "When I suffered losses in the past, you always told me to figure it out myself. To learn from my mistakes. But now that Liliana's arrogance has led to losses, suddenly I'm expected to empty everything I have to help her. And besides," I added, my eyes flicking to Liliana's petulant face, "that includes the Reed Enterprises, what she snatched by wrecking my engagement banquet in the first place. Do I still owe her?" Liliana, who was always used to having our parents fight her battles, widened her eyes in faux outrage. "How could you not owe me, Ilara?" she whined. "If it hadn't been for you so readily giving Alistair to me, I should have known better than to think the shares of the Reed family handed to me as a dowry weren't burning hot to the touch. If my sister had warned me even a little, I wouldn't have stumbled so badly." And she was right. The Reed assets were indeed a trap. At that time, the Reed family was already on the verge of collapse. They just wanted to throw the burden onto me, convinced that I was soft-hearted enough to save both them and the Vance family at once. Too bad that was in my past life. This time Liliana couldn't shoulder the load. She was nothing but an empty-headed girl with no experience, and the weight was crushing her. Elara, my mother scolded, her patience wearing thin. You always had the duty to support your sister. Now that her business is failing and debt is piling up, don't you share the blame? Come on, moving that capital isn't hard for you. Didn't you just secure a large sum of funding? Don't think I don't know. She seemed worried about upsetting my stepfather, and her tone turned sharp and biting. Normally, the old Elara would have swallowed her pride, bowed her head and acquiesced. But now I slowly, deliberately set my napkin on the table and stood up. Impossible, I said, the word flat and final. My mother slapped the table, the china rattling. I refuse. That's bridge capital, I explained, my voice cold and clear. If I hand it to Liliana to patch her hole, she'll just lose it again. Then my entire funding chain will collapse and neither side will earn anything. Do you know how hard I fought for those partners? If I ruin that cooperation now, what will happen to our reputation? Who will dare work with the Vances in the future? Finally, my stepfather Arthur spoke. He had been silent until now, his presence a looming judgment. Are you sure about this path, Elara? His voice was low, brooking no argument. I met his cold, dismissive eyes. Of course I'm sure. I won't sacrifice myself to dress others in glory a second time. His lips twitched, a sure sign of his fury. Very well, Elara. Seems I've given you too much freedom, and you've started to think this family can't survive without you. He rose to his full height, looking down at me. From today on, your authority to manage Vance Group affairs is revoked. All assets under your name are taken back. Go back to where you came from. My mother's face went pale, but not from worry for me. The way she leaned toward him so carefully told me what she really feared, that his anger would spill onto her. Ever since Liliana was born, I had been nothing but an extra in their eyes. If not for my talent in business, they would have thrown me out long ago. My stepfather turned and patted Liliana's head, his voice softening. Don't be afraid. Daddy will give you all of Alara's funds. Those debts of yours are nothing. Be good. Liliana nestled into their arms, dabbing at non-existent tears, her voice soft as silk. Thank you, Daddy. But when she looked at me over his shoulder, her gaze was smug and disdainful, a viper enjoying its kill. The process was swift and brutal. All my positions in the Vance Group were stripped away. Overnight, I became the most thoroughly discarded member of the family. My mother even ordered the servants to toss my belongings into suitcases and delete my contact information from the family registry. I stood outside the wrought iron gates of the Vance estate. The door slammed in my face without a moment's hesitation. My mother didn't even spare me a final glance. The limousines glided past me up the driveway, their occupants ignoring the daughter they had cast out. I lowered my eyes, but there was no ripple of pain inside me. The desperate craving for affection I'd once had was long buried. It had already died in my heart, so even being abandoned now only met me with a chilling calm. I had been ready for this all along. I was dragging my suitcase down the manicured sidewalk, about to call for a driver, when a sleek, black car that looked like it had been built for speed rather than luxury pulled up beside me. The window slid down silently, revealing Cashin's roguish face. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt, his hair slightly messy as if he'd just run his hands through it. Miss Vance, he said, a lazy smirk playing on his lips. Going on a trip? Of course he already knew. My being kicked out of the Vance family was no secret. Liliana had probably announced it to the whole world. He had likely been waiting nearby just to watch the spectacle. He grinned without a care. Want your husband to give you a lift? I didn't hesitate. I won't be polite. I pulled the car door open and climbed into the low-slung passenger seat, then got out again to heave my luggage into the small trunk. He paused, watching my efficient, unceremonious movements. You really don't hold back, do you? He mused, a note of genuine amusement in his voice. As he pulled the car away from the curb, leaving the opulent prison of my old life behind, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. There was at least one business the Vances couldn't take from me. That was the small import-export company my biological father had left behind. After his death, it was transferred under my name. My mother had always dismissed it as a worthless, dusty relic, so she hadn't even mentioned it when they cast me out. It wasn't much, but it was a patch of land to stand on. A foothold. As long as the mountain stands, there will always be firewood to burn. With Cashin and me together we wouldn't starve. But I knew, with a cold certainty settling in my stomach, that the Vances and the Reeds were not done with me. The battle had only just begun, and the first skirmish had left me wounded but not defeated. I glanced at Cashin's profile, his focus on the road ahead. He was an unknown variable, a shadow I had invited into my life. But in the darkness, even a shadow can be a shelter. And I was ready to fight fire with whatever this man had to offer. The apartment Cashin led me to was a reflection of the man himself. Stark, modern, and devoid of sentimental clutter. It was perched high in a building that wasn't the most luxurious, but offered a commanding, almost predatory view of the city. It felt less like a home and more like a lair or a command center. I didn't mind. Sentimentality was a luxury I could no longer afford. For the first few days, we moved around each other like wary cats, establishing territories in the open-plan space. I claimed the small second bedroom as an office, plugging in my laptop and surrounding myself with files from my father's company, Ethelred Imports. The name was a ghost, a whisper of a man I barely remembered. The company itself was a sleepy, barely profitable entity dealing in niche artisanal goods. It was perfect. Unnoticed and, more importantly, unclaimed by the Vances. Cashin, for his part, seemed to have no visible means of support. He left at odd hours, sometimes returning with the dawn, smelling of night air and coffee. He never offered an explanation and I never asked. Our relationship was a tense, silent pact. We were allies of convenience, bound by a ring and a reckless gamble. The peace, brittle as it was, shattered within a week. A project managed by the Vance Group, a new commercial development, suffered a catastrophic accident. A scaffolding collapse, the news reports blared. Multiple fatalities. In my previous life I had overseen the initial planning of that project and knew the safety protocols were sound, but required rigorous, expensive enforcement. Liliana, in her cost-cutting arrogance, had clearly neglected them. But then the narrative twisted. Like a venomous snake, the blame turned and struck at me. The Vances, through a web of legal loopholes and a subclause in an old partnership agreement, dumped the liability onto Ethelred Imports. They claimed we were responsible for a faulty component in the scaffolding hardware, a shipment we had facilitated years ago. It was a brazen, brutal move. Arthur Vance was publicly crucifying his discarded stepdaughter to save his precious biological daughter and her floundering new husband. The morning the lawsuit was served, I arrived at the modest office of Ethelred Imports to find a nightmare. The narrow street was clogged with news vans, their satellite dishes piercing the gray sky like morbid flowers. A crowd had gathered, angry, grieving families holding up photos of the dead, their faces contorted with a pain I recognized all too well. The air was thick with their shouted accusations and the flash of cameras. Murderer! Vance scum! Your company killed my son. I tried to push through, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. A rotten tomato hit the doorframe next to my head, splattering red and acidic across the glass. The physicality of the hatred stunned me. This was my mother's doing. She was using the same method that had hounded my own father, a gentle man who'd been driven into an early grave by relentless financial and social pressure. She saw me as a stubborn stain and she was using a blowtorch to scrub me out. The weight of it, the sheer unfairness, was a physical blow. I managed to stagger into the office, past my terrified secretary Lily, and into the relative silence of my small room. I collapsed into my chair, my body trembling. The voices outside were a relentless tide, and for a moment I was a child again, listening to creditors pound on our door, watching my father's spirit break piece by piece. I would not break. I would be damned before I bowed to her. I would not let her think I was as easy to trample as my father had been. The stress, the sleepless nights, and the raw fury conspired against me. I woke the next morning feeling like my skull was splitting open. My throat was a desert of sandpaper and fire. The flu or something worse had taken root, seizing the opportunity my weakened state provided. My phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand, Lily no doubt with more catastrophic updates. I fumbled for it, my vision swimming. "I'll be right there," I rasped, the sound barely recognizable as my own. "Just give me a little longer." "President Vance." Lily's voice was shocked through the speaker. "What's wrong with your voice? Should I beg our partners for more time?" "No," I choked out. "I have to go." The very act of speaking sent me into a coughing fit that left me gasping. "Just wait half an hour. I'll be there." But I had no strength at all. When I tried to sit up, the room spun violently. I was burning up. Desperate, I crawled toward the nightstand where I kept some cold medicine, my body heavy and uncooperative. The polished wooden floor felt icy against my feverish skin. Well, Miss Vance. Going for a swim. The lazy, teasing voice came from above me. Of course. He stood there, fresh from a shower, a towel slung around his hips, water droplets clinging to the hard planes of his chest. He held a mug of coffee, watching my pathetic progress with detached amusement. I had no interest in admiring his sculpted physique. My voice was a hoarse croak. The drawer. He blinked, put his cup down on a nearby console and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at me with a strange seriousness. What are you trying to do? A Donald Duck impression. To hell with you, I managed, the curse ending in another racking cough. I knew I couldn't count on him. Gritting my teeth against the pain and dizziness, I tried to haul myself up using the nightstand. My vision doubled. I was going to fall. But before I could hit the floor, a strong hand clamped onto my arm, pressing me back down onto the mattress. His touch was surprisingly firm, not cruel but unyielding. I'll call a doctor. You need to rest. No, I insisted, struggling against his grip. It was like trying to move a mountain. The company's waiting for me. They'll tear it apart. Even if the company collapses, you won't die. But if you keep this up, you will. His voice was flat, factual. I have to go. I shoved at his arm with what little strength I had, a futile gesture. I stumbled off the bed, my legs giving way, and landed hard on my knees on the floor, the impact jarring my teeth. The posture was one of utter submission, as if I were begging him for alms. For God's sake, he cursed, the indifference finally cracking. In one fluid motion he scooped me up and pinned me back onto the bed, his body leaning over mine to keep me there. You're not going anywhere today. I struggled, a wild, feverish energy fueling me, but his grip only tightened. At last he lost patience. Enough, he barked, the sound sharp and loud in the quiet room. He was shouting at me, his face inches from mine, the storm in his eyes now a full-blown hurricane. Do you want to die before you're satisfied? Look at yourself right now. His shout shocked me into a moment of terrible, fever-drenched clarity. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a wave of crushing weakness. Clenching my teeth, the truth I had been holding back tumbled out, fueled by delirium and despair. You don't understand, I whispered, tears of frustration mingling with the sweat on my temples. My father. He was hounded to death by families demanding justice. For a debt that wasn't even his. Cashin went very still above me. My mother. She's using the same method on me. She saw me as a burden the moment she remarried. I'll be damned before I bow to her. I won't let her think I'm as easy to trample as my father was. The room fell silent for a long moment, the only sound my ragged breathing. Then Cashin let out a long, slow sigh. The anger seemed to drain from him, replaced by something else, something unreadable. I get it, he said, his voice low and quiet. I'll handle it. A weak, hysterical laugh bubbled in my chest. My fever-clouded mind, stripped of its filters, blurted out the impossible truth. You can't. You won't rise until 2 years from now when you meet your partners. Only then will you soar, and not even I can stand against you. His brow furrowed, the storm in his eyes replaced by pure, unadulterated confusion. What are you talking about? But the darkness was closing in. My eyes rolled back and the world vanished into a feverish void. When I woke, the light in the room was different. Softer. I was drenched in sweat, but the fire in my veins had receded to a dull ache. My mind felt clearer. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand. The screen glowed, showing the date and time. I had slept for 2 whole days. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. The company. The families. They would have torn Ethelred Imports to shreds. I bolted upright, the movement making my head spin. The door opened and Lily entered, carrying a tray with tea and toast. Lily, what are you doing here? Go. Deal with the families at the company. I nearly screamed, my voice still hoarse. She blinked at me in confusion. But President Vance. Mr. Reed already took care of everything. I froze. Say that again. Mr. Reed. Wasn't he sent by you? He showed up the day before yesterday, handled the families, negotiated with the media, and even persuaded the Vances to withdraw their lawsuit. I thought it was all under your direction. My head spun. How could I have directed him? I had been unconscious. How? And he covered the financial gap for the company too, Lily added, still looking baffled. The immediate liabilities. I don't know where he got the money. It was a substantial sum. A chill, entirely separate from my illness, ran from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet. In my past life, Cashin's rise had been far too sudden. Once he took off, no one could bring him down. If it were mere luck, it wouldn't make sense. That kind of power could only come from careful planning, years in the making. Which meant right now he was already far deeper, far more connected, and far more dangerous than anyone could possibly guess. Where is he? I demanded, throwing back the covers. He was slashed twice by one of the angry family members, Lily said, her face paling at the memory. He's resting in the other bedroom. President Vance, he just woke up too. Don't get agitated. What are you trying to do? I was already on my feet, my legs wobbly but functional. I had to see him. I had to understand. But before I could take a step, a figure appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. His face was pale, his left hand and forearm wrapped in thick white bandages. A darker stain of blood was visible through the gauze on his bicep. He looked down at me from his height, his expression not one of relief or warmth, but of livid, cold anger. Sensing the tension, Lily quickly slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her. Cashin's lips curved into a cold, mocking smile. Miss Vance, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You really do put on one face for the public and another in private. You just used me and now you're planning to toss me aside. I was utterly bewildered. What are you talking about? He took a step into the room, his presence dominating the space. He pressed me back onto the bed with his uninjured hand, the movement swift and aggressive. What do you mean, he bit out, each word dripping with venom, by calling Liliana Vance here to take care of me? You couldn't even spare the money for a nurse. You'd rather have her take care of me instead. In an instant I understood. The pattern was repeating itself. In my past life, even after I'd rejected Liliana outright, she had secretly contacted Alistair. She'd weaseled her way into my home, my life, my marriage, under the guise of sisterly concern. And now, Reborn, she was trying the same tactic with Cashin. I just woke up, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor inside. Why would I call her to take care of you? Even if I were perfectly clear-headed, I would never send that viper to you. Cashin chuckled, a hollow, bitter sound. His eyes stayed sharp, dissecting me. Of course. Miss Vance, always far-sighted, already planning your path ahead. Why else would you rush to marry me, the bastard son? He leaned closer, his stormy eyes boring into mine. You're planning to use me for 2 years, then kick me aside when I've served my purpose. Isn't that right? I froze. So this was what he'd been waiting for. My mind spun back to the nonsense I'd blurted in my fever. You won't rise until 2 years from now. Things I hadn't meant to say. Words I barely remembered. He saw the recognition in my eyes and his smile turned triumphant and bitter. I know how to tell the difference between drunken rambling and heartfelt truth. The things you said, the clarity in your gaze when you spoke of my future. The clarity in his own gaze made my chest tighten painfully. Cashin, don't tell me you. His smile was mocking but threaded with a deep, old bitterness. I should have realized it earlier. No wonder you handed your sister Alistair Reed. No wonder you chose me as your husband. You wanted me to gamble that you'd love you. He said the word love, as if it were a curse. Miss Vance, even Reborn, you're still so chilling. You'd even use love as bait, wouldn't you? I had never seen this man, usually so carefree and detached, wear a face marked with such raw sorrow, tinged with expectations he thought could never be met. When I didn't answer immediately, his smile faltered further. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Power. Money. Revenge. Just don't you dare use love to trick me. His voice dropped to a whisper. 2 years from now, when you've gotten everything you want, did you even think of what to do with me? Well, right. I know I'm just a bastard unworthy of your love. I should have let that angry family stab me to death, left my inheritance to you, and saved myself the breath of waiting to see you discard me, Alara. The self-loathing in his voice was a physical blow. Without thinking, my hand flew out. I slapped him across the face. I didn't dare use much force, afraid to hurt him further, but my hand still stung when it landed. He froze, the red mark blooming on his cheekbone. Do you really have to demean yourself this way? My voice shook with a fury I didn't know I possessed. If I don't love you, you won't live? If others don't like you, you'll abandon your work? When did you become so spineless? How could a man like that ever have been my opponent? When had Cashin Reed become such a fool? He stood there, bandaged and bleeding, and my anger softened into something else, something aching and profound. My voice dropped to a whisper. Besides, Cashin, I do love you. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The one I love most in this world is you, I said, the truth of the words settling deep within me, surprising even myself. It wasn't a strategy anymore. Somewhere in the chaos in the alliance, it had become real. There's no one else. I cautiously reached out and guided his uninjured hand to my face, pressing his palm against my cheek. He was still frozen, a statue of conflicted emotion. Finally, his gaze dropped. His voice was hoarse. It hurts. My heart jolted violently. It was the first time he had ever called me by my name instead of Miss Vance. I'm sorry, I whispered, my free hand searching for the wound on his arm, but he caught it. He rubbed my hand gently against the spot on his cheek where I'd slapped him. Here. A faint, real smile touched his lips. I didn't even hit you that hard, I murmured. He slid my hand downward over his bandaged left hand. Here. His voice was softer now. Finally, he pressed my palm against the bandage on his abdomen, his own hand covering mine, holding it there. I could feel the firm muscle and the slight dampness of the gauze. And here, he murmured, his eyes shadowed. This one I can't blame you for. He leaned his forehead against mine, his breath a warm caress. Alara, I was just humiliated at Liliana's place. You'd better make it up to me. I froze. It wasn't like I sent her to you. But before I could explain further, Cashin Reed pushed me back onto the bed, a new, determined light in his eyes. Even with one hand injured, he had no problem taking liberties. You still owe me, Alara, he whispered against my skin, his voice a low promise. You better make it up to me. I was dumbfounded, a protest dying on my lips as his mouth found mine. The anger, the suspicion, the bitterness, it all melted away in the heat of that kiss, replaced by a desperate, raw connection. Before long, lost in a tangle of limbs and whispered apologies, I couldn't help but curse his name, the sound swallowed by his kiss. Cashin Reed, you're inhuman. Several hours later, he finally let me go. I collapsed against his chest, half asleep, my body limp and sated. His breath was a soft brush against my ear. Alara, he said, his voice thick with sleep and satisfaction. I told you, once something is mine, you can't take it back. I groaned, turned over and buried my face in the pillow, murmuring a faint, noted. But as I drifted into a truly restful sleep for the first time since my rebirth, a new resolve hardened within me. Liliana had crossed a line. Reborn or not, she still dared to sabotage my marriage. If I didn't teach her a lesson this time, what was the point of living another life? The game had just changed. The stakes were no longer just about survival or revenge. They were about the man sleeping beside me, and the fragile, furious love that was blooming in the ruins of our lives. I woke to the scent of Cashin on the sheets, a mix of clean soap and something uniquely, dangerously him. The space beside me was empty but still warm. Sunlight streamed into the room, and for the first time, the Stark apartment felt less like a lair and more like a sanctuary. The memory of the previous night, the confrontation, the confession, the shocking, desperate intimacy, flooded back, sending a wave of heat through me that had nothing to do with fever. My body ached in a pleasant, unfamiliar way, a stark contrast to the sickly weakness of days prior. The crushing weight of the lawsuit and the mob was gone. Cashin had handled it. He had bled for it. The reality of that settled deep in my bones. Lily was in the kitchen, efficiently organizing a stack of documents. She looked up as I entered, a relieved smile breaking across her face. President Vance. You're awake. Mr. Reed bought you breakfast, but he's at the company finishing things up. She gestured to a still warm paper bag on the counter. He said to tell you the foundations are stable. The Vances have officially withdrawn their claim. I nodded, the information slotting into place. The immediate threat was neutralized. But a colder, sharper purpose was coiling in my stomach. I picked up a still warm pastry but had no appetite. The image of Liliana, smug and deceitful, whispering false comforts to my wounded husband, burned behind my eyes. President Vance, you haven't even eaten. Where are you going? Lily asked, her smile fading as I turned toward the door. To beat someone up, I said, my voice calm and flat. She stared at me, shocked into silence. I didn't wait for a reply. Liliana Vance had real nerve. Reborn, with all the knowledge of her past treachery, she still dared to encroach on what was mine. If I didn't carve this lesson into her soul now, she would never stop. I took a cab to the opulent high-rise where Alistair and Liliana had set up their marital home, a symbol of the Reed-Vance alliance that was already showing cracks. I didn't have a plan, only a white-hot fury that demanded an outlet. But as I approached their door, raised voices from within stopped me short. You regret it? What do you mean you regret it? Liliana's voice was a shrill shard of glass, scraping against the quiet hallway. Why didn't you say so when you married me? Now that she's married your brother, you change your mind. What kind of man are you? My breath caught. I pressed myself against the wall, just out of sight of the peephole. Alistair's voice followed, cold but strained, the polished veneer cracking. I told you no matter how much you want, I'll give it to you. The money, the status. But what's the point of this endless scene? A scene. Liliana shrieked. Do you think divorcing me means she'll take you back? Alistair Reed, you faithless bastard. At least I'm not a bastard child, he shot back, his voice dripping with a contempt I'd never heard him use before. But your so-called brilliance can't even compare to a bastard like Cashin. And don't think I don't know you went to see him. There was a sharp intake of breath. You spied on me? I finally saw his true strength, didn't you? Alistair's tone was laced with a bitter, knowing triumph. The way he handled that lawsuit, the resources he mobilized overnight. And now you think you married the wrong person. Fine. Then divorce me quickly and stop delaying both of our happiness. The shouting abruptly stopped. The door was wrenched open and both of them stood there, frozen as they saw me. Alistair's eyes, which had been dark with anger, lit up with a desperate, pathetic hope. His gaze raked over me, taking in my simple clothes, my clear eyes, the life that had returned to my face. Ilara, he breathed, my name a tremulous prayer on his lips. My vision darkened for a second. Why did hearing him call me Ilara, with that possessive longing, make my skin crawl? The memory of his coldness in my past life, his abandonment as I bled out, was a ghost between us. Now was not the time for this. The confrontation I'd craved now felt tawdry and pointless. I had what I needed, the confirmation of their crumbling facade. I turned on my heel and ran. Ilara, wait. Alistair shouted after me, his footsteps echoing in the hall. If you walk out now, don't you ever come back. Let go. I yelled, wrenching my arm free from his grasping hand as he caught up to me at the elevator. Don't make me say it twice. I leapt into the waiting cab, my heart hammering. Drive. Quick. The driver, a cap pulled low over his eyes, nodded and pulled away from the curb with a smooth, powerful acceleration that felt at odds with the modest vehicle. I leaned back, closing my eyes, trying to erase the image of Alistair's desperate face. I had to leave that madman behind me. The cab sped through the streets and by some strange coincidence, stopped right in front of my apartment building. Perfect timing. I started to praise the driver's efficiency until he lifted his baseball cap, revealing a familiar roguish face. My words died in my throat. You, I stammered, my mind reeling. What are you doing here? His long fingers tapped the steering wheel casually. My brother still can't stop thinking about you, huh? The lazy tone didn't hide the sharp edge beneath. I swallowed hard, the feeling in my chest ominous. Sure enough, his low, mocking laugh followed. Unlike me, no one's ever remembered me. He looked out the windshield, his profile stark. From the moment I have memories, all I ever heard was being cursed as a bastard. At 6 years old, when they finally dragged me back to the Reed family, I was starved, frozen, unloved. Not a single kind word from anyone. Enough, I blurted out, panicked by the raw pain he was so casually exposing. I remember you. I'll always remember you. Forever. His expression turned triumphant, the vulnerability vanishing as if it had never been. Is that so? He purred, turning those stormy eyes on me. Then prove it. I turned my head away, my cheeks burning. I couldn't understand this man. In my past life, he had been my undefeatable enemy, a titan of industry I could never bring down. And in private he was like this, A complex, wounded, and dangerously elusive creature. He raised a brow, clearly about to press me further. Terrified of what he might say next, of the emotional chasm he was opening, I acted on pure instinct. I leaned across the console and kissed him. It was meant to be a swift, silencing gesture. A period at the end of his sentence. But the moment my lips touched his, the seatbelt snapped loose. Before I could react, his arm locked around my waist, dragging me across the console and onto his lap, straddling him in the confined space of the car. He held my hips firmly, tilting his head up to look at me, his eyes dark and hungry. "Not proof enough," he murmured, his voice a rough whisper against my mouth. And for the next several hours, in the dim privacy of that car and then the tangled sheets of our bed, I became his proof. It was different from the night before. That had been about anger and resolution. This was about possession and a desperate, unspoken pact. He was mapping a new territory, not of business or revenge but of us, and he was leaving no inch unclaimed. Perhaps because of my rebirth, or perhaps because my presence had lit a fuse within him, Cashin's rise came earlier and more explosively than in my last life. Our alliance, Ethelred Cashin Holdings, became a silent, swift predator in the business world. We moved with a synchronicity that was almost frightening, leveraging my knowledge of future markets with his unnerving ability to find and exploit hidden opportunities and connections. It was during a review of our funding that I made the discovery. The partner who had provided that crucial, enormous bridge loan to save Ethelred Imports, the one I had fought so hard to secure, was not an external financier. The shell company traced back to a nascent enterprise wholly owned by Cashin Reed. I sat on our bed, the financial statements spread around me, my mind reeling. I looked up at him as he entered the room, fresh from a shower. "You," I said, my voice faint. "It was you. The bridge loan." He leaned against the doorframe, a towel slung around his hips, and shrugged, his expression unreadable. "So?" I licked my suddenly dry lips. "Aren't you afraid I won't be able to pay you back?" A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He walked over and leaned back on the bed, his hands behind his head, the picture of indolent power. "How could a husband ever take back what he's given his wife?" he mused, his eyes holding mine. "The only thing I can't give you yet is my ashes. Everything else you want is yours." The casual, profound devotion in his words stole my breath. I smacked him lightly on the head, my throat tight. "Ashes? Don't you dare. Spit, spit, spit." I made a theatrical show of warding off the bad luck. He laughed, a real, unguarded sound that transformed his face. And that misty, untouchable feeling he had in my past life, the aura of an insurmountable enemy I'd felt even when we first met in this one, it was gone. Now he felt alive. If my past self had known that one day my greatest rival would be holding me in his arms while I slept, I would have sold off my shares and run for the hills overnight. Our territory kept expanding, a silent, ruthless empire built on trust and a shared hunger. We deliberately, coldly refused to let the Vance or Reed families in on any of our ventures. Without me, those two families were no match for the symbiotic monster we had become. Cashin, in a habit I found both amusing and telling, often showed me his chat logs with Liliana. Yes, she was trying to cozy up to him in this life too. He had wanted to block her immediately, but I insisted he keep her around like a digital pet. I just loved watching her act like a clown, her messages growing increasingly desperate and unhinged as he offered bland, non-committal replies. Maybe it was the long days of being brushed off, but her texts grew more furious. "Are you stringing me along?" she finally demanded. Cashin's reply was a masterpiece of brutal simplicity. "You think you're worthy?" She was so enraged she stopped contacting him for a while, only to come crawling back weeks later, only to discover he had already deleted her. I laughed out loud at the pettiness of it, a bright, free sound that still felt strange to my own ears. I didn't dare tell Cashin that Alistair had also been pestering me. I blocked every new number as soon as it appeared, but he was like a ghost, clinging to the edges of my new life with a pathetic, relentless tenacity. When Cashin eventually found out, there were few secrets that could be kept from him for long. He didn't shout. He simply withdrew, a silent, brooding storm that lasted for days until I coaxed him out of it with promises and, eventually, the only language that seemed to truly bridge the gap between us. A physical, wordless reaffirmation of my choice. My choice of him. Just when our new life seemed to be settling into a powerful, satisfying rhythm, The axis of my world tilted once more. Cashin vanished. There was no note, no text. His phone went straight to voicemail. A cold dread, entirely separate from any business concern, seized me. This wasn't like him. Not anymore. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text. A single sentence that turned my blood to ice. If you want to see your husband again, come to the old industrial docks. Alone. Tell no one. It wasn't signed, but I knew. I knew with a chilling certainty that curled in my gut. Alistair. The memory of my past life death, the coldness, the abandonment, was a shroud around me. Had his obsession curdled into something truly dangerous? I didn't think. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell Lily. The text said alone. I grabbed my car keys, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip the wheel, and drove. The city blurred past me, a smear of light and noise against the growing panic in my chest. The industrial docks were a graveyard of a bygone era, a sprawling, desolate area of rusting cranes and decaying warehouses on the edge of the city, far from prying eyes. The river here was dark and sluggish, smelling of fuel and decay. My footsteps echoed on the rotten wooden planks as I walked toward the only sign of life, a single powerful figure standing under a flickering halogen light. Alistair Reed. He turned as I approached, his face a mask of cold triumph. Silver-rimmed glasses glinted under the dim light, but they couldn't hide the fanatical gleam in his eyes. So, his voice dripped with sarcasm. You still can't let him go, can you? He took a step toward me. Baby, is he really that good to you? So good you'd abandon even your husband from a past life. I clenched my teeth, the pieces clicking into a horrifying picture. So you came back too? He smiled faintly, a cruel, twisted expression. He took off his glasses and polished them slowly on his shirt. Too bad I came one step too late. By the time I woke up in this life, you had already married my good-for-nothing brother. He slid the glasses back on, his gaze unervingly clear. Elara, after you died, I regretted it more than anything. His words were a violation, a poison seeping into my new life. I spent a lifetime trying to erase your traces from that house, he continued, his voice dropping to a confessional whisper. I thought if I moved somewhere new I wouldn't think of you again. But you were carved into my mind. I couldn't forget. My greatest regret is never being able to spend my life with you. The hypocrisy was staggering. I cut him off, my patience snapping. Where's my husband? Where is Cashin? His words died in his throat. Then a self-mocking smile touched his lips. Elara, you already call him your husband? Then what am I? The sheer, unadulterated audacity left me speechless for a moment. You. I finally said, my voice dripping with a contempt I didn't have to feign. You're nothing. For a moment raw hurt flickered in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a cold sneer. Is that so? He shifted slightly to the side and I saw it. On the dark, oily water behind him, a body was floating, face down, caught in the current. My blood ran cold. My heart stopped. Cashin couldn't swim. He told me once, a throwaway comment about a childhood near drowning. A raw, animal sound tore from my throat. I bolted forward, panic shredding my reason, his name a scream in my mind. But I froze after 2 steps. The body bobbed in the water and the figure was too slight, the hair too long. The face, turned just enough by a wave, was Liliana's. Her vacant eyes stared up at the indifferent sky. The noisy woman insisted on following, Alistair said lightly, his voice laced with a casual venom that was more terrifying than any shout. After tossing her in, it finally went quiet. Relief and rage collided in me, a nauseating cocktail. It wasn't him. If not for her, Alistair continued, you and I never would have been torn apart in the last life. And your corpse was disposed of here too. He gestured around the remote, decaying dock. This place is perfect. No cameras, no witnesses. All I need to say is you slipped and fell and no one would question it. A cold, sharp laugh escaped me. Always someone else's fault, isn't it, Alistair Reed? You really are the same man I knew in my past life. His brow furrowed hard, my scorn hitting its mark. Elara, this dock is close to international waters, he said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. These ships are all registered to tiny countries with no real laws. Once we reach the high seas, murder is nothing at all. I turned fully to face him, my fear evaporating, replaced by a glacial calm. Good. Then put me with my husband. I'll die with him. Alistair flinched as though struck by something sharp. His fingers trembled almost imperceptibly. Of course Cashin is that good, I sneered, pushing the knife in deeper, twisting it. Isn't he 1,000, 10,000 times better than you? If I can't see him one last time before I die, I'll never rest in peace. After being with Cashin for so long, I had picked up a little of his reckless, confrontational manner. To Alistair my words were the highest form of provocation. His expression shifted again and again, from hurt to fury to a hardened resolve, finally settling into a cold, dead laugh. I came back through all this hardship to find you, he ground out, not to watch you flutter around with someone else. He raised his hand. Suddenly the darkness came alive. Hulking men poured out from the shadows of a nearby ship and the rusted huts on the shore, surrounding me. Alistair chuckled, the sound devoid of any warmth. Take her onto the ship, he commanded. She's coming with us. I took a step back but collided with one of the burly men behind me. His grip was like iron. Alistair's voice lowered, intense and certain. Elara, I'll take you somewhere no one will ever find you. There you'll be my only wife. You'll be mine for this lifetime. You're insane, I ground out through my teeth, struggling against the man's hold. Do you really think I came here alone? My secretary already called the police. He smirked, a look of pitying superiority on his face. Lily? I'm sorry. She's been mine for a long time. The betrayal was a physical blow to my chest, stealing my breath. In my rush I hadn't thought it through. I should have reported it myself. I had been so afraid for Cashin, so sure that Alistair's obsession had turned homicidal, that I had walked right into his trap. Before I could say another word, a gag was shoved into my mouth, the coarse fabric choking my protests. They dragged me, kicking and fighting, toward the waiting ship. Its dark hull loomed like a monstrous leviathan. And boom. A deafening explosion tore through the night. The ship meant to take me vanished into a fireball of splintered wood and twisted metal. Then another. And another. The other docked ships erupted one by one, the concussive blasts rocking the very foundations of the dock. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder and closer, their lights painting the smoke-filled sky in pulses of red and blue. Alistair's men scattered in panic. Damn it! Weren't we told there were no cops? One yelled. Don't just stand there. Run. But in moments, police floodlights cut through the chaos, surrounding them from every side. Officers swarmed the dock, rounding up the fleeing men. Alistair stood frozen, his perfect plan disintegrating before his eyes. I stood alone in the center of the desolate dock, the gag still in my mouth, staring out at the burning river. Slowly, from behind a curtain of smoke and flame, the only surviving boat drifted toward me. Its hatch opened smoothly, and Cashin Reed stepped out. He looked utterly unharmed, even bored. In one hand he held a small black remote detonator. He flashed me a grin that was all teeth and triumph. Wife, he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the chaos. Your hero has arrived. I was still clutching the rag they'd stuffed in my mouth. I could only stare at him, speechless, as he walked toward me, the inferno at his back a fitting coronation for the king of shadows I had married. He had not been the damsel in distress. He had been the architect of the rescue. And he had blown up half the dock to prove it. Cashin didn't just walk. He strolled, as if the burning river and the screaming sirens were a particularly interesting art installation. He stopped before me, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a dark amusement. With a gentleness that belied the scene, he reached up and plucked the gag from my mouth. I coughed, my throat raw. You blew up the ships. Just the ugly ones, he said, his thumb stroking my cheek where the rough fabric had chafed the skin. His gaze flickered over my shoulder to where Alistair was being shoved into a police car, his face a mask of stunned fury. He always did have terrible taste in transportation. The casual violence of it, the sheer, unadulterated power he had wielded so precisely, should have terrified me. Instead, a hysterical laugh bubbled in my chest. This was the man I had married. The one who had been my ruin in another life. Now he was my nuclear option. He led me past the chaos, his arm a solid, possessive bar around my waist. We didn't speak until we were in the quiet of our car, the sounds of the dock fading behind us. Lily, I finally asked, my voice small. Turned, he confirmed, his tone matter-of-fact. Alistair bought her loyalty months ago. She was the one who told him about my movements, about this secret funding. She was the one who texted you to come alone. He glanced at me. She's in custody too. Embezzlement. The evidence was surprisingly easy to find once I knew where to look. I leaned my head back against the seat, the final piece of my old life clicking into a prison cell. There was no sadness, only a cold, final closure. The fallout was swift and merciless. The public scandal was a tsunami. Alistair Reed, scion of a once great family, arrested for kidnapping, conspiracy, and the attempted murder of his own wife. The evidence Cashin had provided to the police, audio recordings, financial trails, Lily's testimony, was irrefutable. The Reed name, already teetering, was utterly obliterated. The Vance family, intricately linked to the Reeds through Liliana and their own shady dealings to prop up the failing empire, was caught in the undertow. Arthur Vance was arrested for fraud, conspiracy, and his role in the deadly scaffolding collapse. The empire he had built, the one he had valued over his stepdaughter, crumbled into dust within weeks. My mother came to our apartment. She didn't call. She just appeared at the door, her face haggard, her expensive clothes looking rumpled and out of place in our modern, minimalist hallway. "Ilara," she breathed, her eyes red-rimmed. "You have to help him. You have to testify for your father." He didn't know what Alistair was planning. "We're ruined." I stood in the doorway, not inviting her in. I looked at this woman who had cast me out, who had used my father's memory as a weapon against me, and I felt nothing. An absolute sterile void where a daughter's love should have been. I smiled, a small cold thing. "My people will show you out," I said softly. "That woman, I don't know her. Didn't she just throw me out not long ago?" The color drained from her face. "Ilara, I'm your mother." "The mother I knew died a long time ago," I said, and closed the door in her face. The click of the lock was the sound of a final chapter closing. I leaned against the door, listening to her faint, receding sobs, and felt the last ghost of my past life finally, completely dissolve. I didn't even bother arranging Arthur's funeral when months later, hounded by debt collectors and facing a lifetime in prison, he killed himself with charcoal in a shabby hotel room. The news was a brief, bleak footnote. The mighty Vance reduced to ash. Cashin, on the other hand, spent 2 days kneeling on a washboard in a theatrical display of penance before I finally forgave him for the heart attack he'd given me. "Wife," he'd said, his voice a low, coaxing rumble as he looked up at me from his decidedly uncomfortable perch. "The plan was too dangerous. That's why I didn't tell you. I didn't expect you to care about me so much, rushing in there all alone." A slow, devastating smile spread across his face. "I'm so happy." "Happy? My ass," I muttered, trying to hold on to my anger. But his eyes darkened and he pulled out his one surefire trick. The one that disarmed me every time. "Ilara," he began, his voice dropping into that rare, vulnerable register he used only for this. "I don't have a grandma. She never liked me. She was the first to curse me as a bastard when I was little. There's no one in my past who ever wanted me. Just you." My head pounded with a mix of frustration and a love so fierce it terrified me. I cut him off. "Enough. Enough. Fine. I forgive you." "Okay." He tapped his lips, the vulnerability vanishing, replaced by a predatory gleam. "And how will you apologize?" That night, once again, I became his pillow, his sanctuary, his proof. And in the quiet hours, when he held me tight and whispered into my hair that what was his could never be taken away, I finally, truly believed him. With the Vance and Reed dynasties in ruins, a vacuum was left in the city's business world. Cashin and I moved to fill it, not as scavengers but as conquerors. Ethelred Cashin Holdings was no longer a silent predator. It was a crowned king. We consolidated power with a ruthlessness that was both admired and feared. My foresight and his seemingly bottomless well of resources and strategic genius were an unstoppable combination. We bought the hollowed-out shell of the Vance Group for a pittance at a forced auction. I walked through the opulent headquarters, now silent and echoing, the ghost of my stepfather's ambition a stale smell in the air. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a clean, surgical finality. I was erasing a stain. Cashin let me lead the restructuring. It was my victory to orchestrate. I fired the old guard, the sycophants who had looked down on me, and installed a new merit-based leadership. The company that had once tried to break me was now a sleek, powerful engine under my complete control. One evening we stood in the penthouse office that had once been Arthur Vance's. The city sprawled beneath us, a tapestry of light at our feet. Cashin came to stand behind me, his hands resting on my hips, his chin on my shoulder. "It's all yours," he murmured. "It's ours," I corrected, leaning back into his solid warmth. He was silent for a moment. "He never knew what he had in you. None of them did." "I know," I said. And for the first time the knowledge didn't come with a pang of old hurt. It was just a fact. Our life settled into a new, powerful rhythm. We were partners in every sense of the word. In the boardroom we were a unified front, a perfectly synchronized machine. At home we were a tempestuous, passionate and deeply loyal unit. The man who had been a shadow was now the center of my universe, and I, the woman who had once been his greatest obstacle, was now the foundation of his. The world saw Cashin Reed as the enigmatic, ruthless bastard who had risen from the ashes to claim a throne. They saw me as his brilliant, equally ruthless queen. They didn't see the man who would wake in the night, his body tense from a nightmare he would never speak of, and whose only comfort was to curl himself around me, his face buried in my hair until his breathing evened out. They didn't see the woman who, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, slept through the night without the ghost of blood-stained sheets haunting her dreams. One afternoon I was going through the final boxes of Vance memorabilia that had been sent to my office. I was about to toss a heavy ledger book into the shredding bin when a faded, sepia-toned photograph slipped from its pages and fluttered to the floor. I picked it up. It was a picture of a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, holding the hand of a little girl on a swing. My father. And the little girl was me. I had forgotten this photo existed. I had forgotten his face could look so at peace. I traced the faded image with my finger, a dull ache blooming in my chest. Not the sharp pain of fresh grief, but the older, quieter ache of a love that had been lost too soon. I didn't hear Cashin enter. He moved like a ghost when he wanted to. He looked over my shoulder at the photograph. "He looks like you," he said quietly. "Around the eyes." I nodded, unable to speak. "He'd be proud of you, Alara," Cashin said, his voice certain. "Not of this." He gestured at the opulent office, the skyline view. "But of you. Of the person you became. Of the fight you never gave up." Tears I didn't know I had left welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. They weren't tears of sadness for my father or for my lost family. They were tears of release. For the little girl on the swing who had spent so long trying to earn a love that was never coming. She could finally rest. Cashin didn't try to comfort me with empty words. He simply took the photograph from my trembling hands, placed it carefully on my desk and then pulled me into his arms. He held me while I cried, my tears soaking into his shirt, his hand a steady warm pressure on my back. He was my anchor in the storm of my own history. When the tears subsided I looked up at him. "What about you?" asked my voice thick. "Is there anyone from your past, anyone you'd want to remember?" His stormy gaze grew distant, looking at something I couldn't see. "The past is a country I have no interest in revisiting," he said, his voice flat. "It's full of ghosts who never cared if I lived or died." He looked down at me, his focus returning, sharp and intense. "You're my present, Alara. You're my future. That's all that matters." And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that it was the same for me. The desperate craving for affection from those who would never give it was gone. The need to prove my worth to a family that saw me as a tool was extinguished. I had lost everything. My name, my family, my past. And yet I had gained the one thing I never dared to hope for in either of my lives. A love that was fierce, loyal, and utterly, devastatingly real. A love that had seen the worst of me, my calculation, my desperation, my rage, and had not flinched. A love that had fought for me with the same ruthless intensity with which I had learned to fight for myself. My rebirth was not a chance to change the past. It was a chance to choose differently. And this time I had chosen him. With Cashin by my side I no longer feared ruin because we had built something that could not be ruined. I no longer feared betrayal because the only person whose loyalty I needed was holding me in his arms. I no longer feared the future because for the first time, it was truly, completely ours. In the quiet of that office, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, I finally understood. The journey had been paved with pain and vengeance, but it had led me here. To a throne built not just on power but on partnership. To a life not just of survival but of purpose. And to a man who loved me with the same shattered, formidable and wholehearted intensity with which I loved him. It was more than enough. It was everything. The peace we built felt like a fortress. 4 months, we moved through our world as its undisputed rulers, our partnership a seamless dance of ambition and affection. The scandal had faded from the headlines, replaced by awe for our company's meteoric rise. Cashin's past as the bastard son was now a gritty origin story, and my own was a tale of triumphant resilience. We were untouchable. Or so I thought. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. A plain, unmarked envelope was delivered to my office at Ethelred Cashin Holdings. No return address. Inside was a single grainy photograph. It was of a young woman with dark hair, her face turned partly away, but the profile was unmistakably mine. She was standing on a familiar rotten dock, the one where Liliana had died. The timestamp in the corner was from 2 weeks prior. My blood ran cold. It was impossible. I hadn't been to those docks since the night of the fire. I showed it to Cashin that evening. The casual ease drained from his face, replaced by a cold, focused intensity one hadn't seen since the confrontation with Alistair. He took the photo, his fingers tightening on the edges. "A trick," he said, his voice low. "A poor one. Someone's trying to rattle you." "Who?" I asked, my own voice unsteady. "Alistair is in prison. Arthur is dead. My mother has vanished. Who's left?" "Ghosts," he replied, his stormy eyes dark. "But ghosts can't hold cameras." He spent the night on the phone and at his computer, his brow furrowed, the digital glow etching harsh lines on his face. By morning he had nothing. The envelope was untraceable. The photo, while real, came from a public traffic camera whose feed had been conveniently corrupted for the exact time frame in question. It was a message, not a threat. A reminder that someone was watching. A week later the second message arrived. This time it was a document slipped between the pages of a financial report. It was a photocopy of a birth certificate. Cashin's. The space for father was blank as expected. But scrawled in red ink across the bottom were 2 words. "I know." Cashin stared at the document, his face a mask of stone. The carefully constructed walls around his past were being probed. "It's about me," he said flatly. "They're coming for me." "Then they're coming for both of us," I said, taking his hand. His fingers were icy. The attacks that followed were not against our persons but against our empire. A lucrative merger we had been finalizing for months fell apart at the last moment, the other company withdrawing with vague, nervous apologies. A key investor suddenly pulled his capital, citing unforeseen personal circumstances. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each one precisely aimed at the joints of our business, orchestrated by someone who knew our operations intimately. We were under siege by a phantom. The press, smelling blood in the water, began to run speculative pieces. Is the Ethelred Cashin reign nearing its end? Cracks in the foundation. The confidence we had projected began to feel like a facade. The breaking point came during a gala for the city's business elite. It was our first major public appearance since the attacks began, a show of force. I wore a gown of defiant crimson, Cashin a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin of shadow. We were the picture of power, smiling, shaking hands, projecting an unshakable unity. Then he appeared. He was an older man, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with a calm patrician face that held a chilling familiarity. He moved through the crowd with an easy authority that commanded respect, a circle of admirers forming around him. I didn't recognize him, but I felt Cashin go rigid beside me. His hand, which had been resting lightly on the small of my back, tightened into a fist. "Who is that?" I whispered. Cashin's voice was a low, guttural thing I barely recognized. "Julian Croft." The name meant nothing to me. But the look in Cashin's eyes, a mix of raw, ancient hatred and something that looked almost like fear, told me everything. This was the ghost. This was the architect of our recent troubles. Croft finally detached himself from his group and walked toward us, a polite smile on his face. His eyes, a pale, calculating blue, swept over me with detached interest before settling on Cashin. "Cashin," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "It's been a long time. I see you've done well for yourself." His gaze flicked to me. "And this must be the remarkable Alara Vance. Your wife." The pause before wife was a deliberate, insulting hesitation. Croft, Cashin acknowledged, his tone dangerously neutral. I heard you were back in the country. I'd hoped it was just a rumor. One should always come home to tend to family matters, Croft said, his smile widening slightly. Don't you agree? He turned his full attention to me. My dear, you've built quite an impressive little enterprise. It's a shame to see it destabilized by such avoidable complications. The threat was veiled in pleasantries, but it was a threat nonetheless. What do you want, Croft? Cashin's voice was a whip crack. Want? Croft feigned surprise. I merely want what's mine. A reckoning long overdue. You see, Cashin, you were always an investment. A messy, unfortunate one, but an investment nonetheless. And I've come to collect my returns. He gave a slight mocking bow. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other very soon. He melted back into the crowd, leaving a void of cold dread in his wake. The car ride home was silent, the air thick with tension. The moment we were inside our apartment, Cashin slammed his hand against the wall, the impact echoing through the quiet space. Damn him, he snarled, his composure shattering. Damn him to hell. Who is he, Cashin? I demanded, my own fear giving way to a fierce protectiveness. What does he want from you? He paced the length of the living room, a caged panther. He's my grandfather, he finally bit out. My mother's father. The revelation stunned me. I thought, you never spoke of anyone. Because they were dead to me, he roared, turning on me, his eyes blazing. Julian Croft is a vulture. A man who cares for nothing but power and legacy. My mother was his greatest disappointment. She fell in love with a married man, got pregnant with me, and was cast out. He offered her no help, no comfort. He let her die in poverty, and when the Reeds finally took me in out of grudging obligation, he saw an opportunity. He provided seed capital. Not out of kindness. It was a loan. With interest. The pieces began to fall into place. The hidden resources, the sudden rise. The money you used to start, it was his? Every damn cent, Cashin said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. And the interest isn't monetary. He wanted a puppet. A vessel for the Croft name to re-enter high society through the back door of the Reed family. He wanted me to take over the Reeds and deliver them to him. I refused. I built my own empire instead. I thought I was free of him. But the loan was structured to be called in at his discretion, Cashin finished, a bitter smile twisting his lips. A poison pill. He's calling it in now. He doesn't just want his money back with 2 decades of compound interest. He wants my company. He wants everything I've built. He wants to prove that I was always just his bastard grandson, incapable of being anything more. The scale of the threat was monumental. Julian Croft wasn't just a business rival. He was the demon from Cashin's past returned to claim his due. He knew every weakness, every secret, every insecurity. I walked over to him, placing my hands on his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart. Look at me, I said, my voice firm. You are not his investment. You are not a puppet. You are Cashin Reed. You're my husband. And this is our company. He looked down at me, the storm in his eyes raging. Alara, he'll destroy us. He'll take it all. Let him try, I said, my own resolve hardening into diamond. He thinks he's fighting the lonely, angry boy you were. He has no idea he's fighting both of us now. For the first time that night, a flicker of the old, reckless light returned to his gaze. He cupped my face in his hands. He'll use you. He'll come for you to get to me. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the same smile I'd worn when I handed Alistair to Liliana. The smile of a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Good, I whispered. Let him. I've already died once. I'm not afraid of ghosts. The war for our future had just begun. But this time the enemy wasn't a faithless fiancé or a cruel family. It was a specter from the shadows, and we would have to fight him on his own terms. We were no longer just building an empire. We were defending our home. The war with Julian Croft was not fought in boardrooms with hostile takeovers, but in the shadows with whispers and knives. He was a master of a different kind of warfare. One of reputation, of influence, of turning allies into neutrals and neutrals into enemies. The avoidable complications he had mentioned manifested as a coordinated smear campaign. Whispers about the instability of my mental state after my traumatic family history began to circulate. Anonymous sources questioned the legality of Cashin's initial capital, hinting at dark criminal origins. Our stock price, once unassailable, began a slow, sickening slide. The vultures were circling and Julian Croft was their master. Cashin became a man possessed. The playful, teasing husband was gone, replaced by a strategist burning with a cold fire. He spent days and nights in his study, a map of our corporate and personal connections spread across the walls, tracing the invisible threads Croft was pulling. He was trying to fight a ghost with logic and data, but Croft was fighting with the one weapon we were most vulnerable to, the past. I knew I couldn't fight him on that battlefield. I had to change the game. "Give me the file," I said to Cashin one night, finding him staring hollow-eyed at a financial report. "What file?" "The file. On Croft. You have one." "I know you do." He hesitated, his protective instincts warring with his pragmatism. Finally, he unlocked a drawer in his desk and handed me a slim, encrypted tablet. "It's not pretty, Alara." "I don't need pretty. I need a chink in his armor." For the next 48 hours I disappeared into Julian Croft's life. I read about his impeccable reputation, his philanthropic endeavors, his vast old money empire built on shipping and quiet, centuries-old investments. It was a fortress. But every fortress has its weak point. I found it buried in a decades-old, nearly forgotten lawsuit. A dispute with a minor business partner that had been settled out of court. The partner had accused Croft of something more than breach of contract. He had accused him of stealing an idea, a proprietary shipping logistics algorithm, and driving the original inventor to bankruptcy and ultimately suicide. It was a cold case. A dead man's word against a titan. But it was a thread. While Cashin fortified our present, I went digging for a ghost. I found the inventor's daughter, a woman named Clara, living in quiet obscurity in a small coastal town. She was wary, hardened by disappointment. It took days of patient conversation, of sharing my own story of loss and betrayal, to earn a sliver of her trust. "I have nothing left to fight him with," she said, her voice etched with a lifetime of bitterness. "He won. He always wins." "He hasn't won yet," I told her. "And he's not just fighting you anymore." I returned to the city with a box of her father's old papers. Scribbled equations, frantic notes, the blueprints of a dream that had been stolen. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a foundation. Meanwhile, Cashin, using his own labyrinthine network, had unearthed something else. Croft's financial empire was a carefully constructed house of cards, heavily leveraged to fund his quiet war against us. He was vulnerable. He needed a quick, decisive victory to stay afloat. We had our strategy. Cashin would attack his finances, a direct, brutal assault. I would attack his legacy, a slower, more insidious poison. The final confrontation was not at a gala or a board meeting. It was in the sterile silence of a private dining club, a place Croft considered his personal sanctuary. We didn't have an invitation. We walked in as if we owned the place, the gravity of our purpose parting the sea of startled patrons. He was at his usual table, alone, sipping a glass of claret. He looked up, and for a fraction of a second, surprise flickered in those pale blue eyes before being smoothed away by condescending amusement. "To what do I owe this intrusion?" he asked. "The terms of your loan are void," Cashin said, his voice cutting through the hushed room. He tossed a thick legal document onto the table. "The original contract was predicated on your provision of clean capital. We have evidence it was derived from fraudulent activities, specifically the theft of intellectual property from one Arthur Finley." Croft didn't even glance at the papers. The ravings of a dead man. Unenforceable. "Perhaps," I said, stepping forward. My voice was calm, but it carried. "But the court of public opinion is a different matter. We've prepared a rather detailed account for the financial journals. The story of Julian Croft, the man who built his empire on the corpse of a genius. It's very compelling. It has equations and everything." I placed Clara's folder gently on top of Cashin's legal documents. "His daughter is ready to testify. She's found her voice again." For the first time I saw a crack in his patrician armor. A tiny muscle twitched in his jaw. He looked from Cashin to me, and I saw the moment his calculation shifted. He had expected to fight a bitter young man haunted by his past. He hadn't accounted for me. For the woman who had already lost everything and had built herself anew from the ashes, who understood that reputation was a currency more valuable than cash. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "You've merely bought yourselves time. I will bury you." "You're welcome to try," Cashin said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of the bastard son who had just checkmated the king. "But your house is already on fire. Your creditors are circling. You leveraged everything to break us and you failed. You have nothing left." Croft stared at us, his face a pale, rigid mask of hatred. The silence in the room was absolute. He was beaten and he knew it. The ghost had been exorcised not with a shout, but with a whisper and a spreadsheet. We turned and walked out, leaving him sitting in the ruins of his own arrogance. The aftermath was a quiet implosion. Julian Croft's empire, built on secrets and stolen dreams, collapsed within weeks. There was no dramatic arrest, no final showdown. He simply vanished from public life, his name becoming a cautionary footnote. The attacks on our company ceased. The whispers died down. The stock price stabilized, then began to climb again, stronger than before. We stood once more on the balcony of our penthouse, the city lights glittering below. The air was clean, the silence between us comfortable and deep. "It's over," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. "No," Cashin replied, his arm tightening around me. "It's just beginning. The real beginning." He was right. The battles with Alistair, with my family, with Croft, they had all been about surviving the past. About defending what was ours. Now for the first time there were no ghosts at the door. No enemies lurking in the shadows. The future stretched out before us, vast and uncharted, and it was truly, completely ours to shape. I looked up at him, at the man who had been my enemy, my ally, my husband, my salvation. The storm in his eyes had finally stilled, replaced by a profound, quiet peace. "My father would be proud of you too, you know," I said softly. He looked down at me, a question in his gaze. "You built something real," I continued. "Not from his money or his name, but from your own will. You broke the cycle." He didn't speak. He simply bent his head and kissed me, a kiss that was not about passion or possession but about promise. A promise for the future we would build together, a future free from the chains of the past. In both my lives I had fought for love, for approval, for survival. I had clawed my way up from the depths of betrayal and despair. I had faced down death and ruin. And it had all led me here, to this moment, to this man. The rebirth had not just given me a second chance. It had given me him. And with Cashin by my side, I was no longer Alara Vance, the scorned stepdaughter, or Alara Reed, the ruthless queen. I was simply Alara. Whole, unbroken, and finally irrevocably free. The end.